Good afternoon. Happy Sunday. He is risen. I think it would be appropriate to start this in prayer, but I do not feel that I am worthy of leading a group prayer. So I'm going to take a few minutes and quietly in my head recite the Lord's Prayer. Okay, so let's see now. I thought that in order to strike interest in this channel, it might be worthwhile to maybe highlight some of the controversial ideas that I'm going to be purporting in this book. Like I've mentioned before, many of these ideas aren't mine. They come from very skilled, highly researched papers and professors, and sometimes some wacky theorists. But largely there's a reason behind what I'm going to be writing about. There are controversial things that are going to pop up throughout this book because of the way that I've interpreted the information that we have from the Bible himself. I mean, that's kind of a weird one, but God is, Yeshua is the living word, so, I mean, I'm saying himself in that sense, but I know that you know what I mean. So, if you don't, that's okay. Maybe you're new to Christianity. Anyway, the major controversial topics that I kind of want to do a precursor over to strike interest in this book are the genealogies of Yeshua, when Jesus was born, and that Yeshua's family. So very basic stuff that most people have quite strong opinions about, one way or another. If the camera's shaking, that's because there are dogs on the bed. I do have scripture references for these things, but of course, you know, there are many things that might get people upset. So you have church tradition, or you have people who decide to take some things literally and some things not so literally. I've said it before, but this is an historical fiction. So whether the content of my version of events is correct, you know, while I purport it, it's not the gospel. Okay, so I think that if you disagree with it, that's totally fine. And there is plenty of research and citations within the Bible to be able to back up your claim also. But if I'm sparking debate, I'm getting people thinking. So I'm not really trying to play devil's advocate, but I am sort of going to tell you where I got these ideas. Without further ado, let's get into the genealogy. As has been pointed out by many an atheist or agnostic, or maybe a critical thinking Christian who sort of looks at the genealogies one day and thinks, wait a minute, why aren't they the same? This is for you. Nehemiah Gordon is a man who has done a lot of he's a Jewish scholar, and he has done extensive research on the Torah. I think he actually worked on some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's actually quite fascinating. He's a Karaite Jew, so it's important to note that he's not a believer, but that in Yeshua as his savior, but that doesn't really detract from from a clear reading of the text, and having a Jewish cultural input can sometimes elucidate some things. So when I found out that upon an Aramaic version of the book of Matthew that was found, Nehemiah, I think this was on video that Michael Rood hosted. Now, I really don't agree with Michael Rood, especially on his timeline of Jesus' life. But that doesn't mean that the information in this particular video wasn't interesting to me. The claim is that the book of Matthew covers Mary's genealogy, while the book of Luke covers Joseph's genealogy. Why is that interesting? Most people that have decided on the genealogies already have actually reversed that. They think that Matthew's genealogy is Joseph's and Luke's genealogy is Mary's. That sometimes is church tradition. But I think that I agree with Nehemiah Gordon's version because, for several reasons. This information came from another Jewish man. His name is Sam Aronow. In the late centuries BC, maybe the final hundreds there, Hillel was born, Rabbi Hillel. A lot of people have compared Jesus to Hillel and vice versa. Some people think that Jesus copied a lot of what Hillel had to say. The reason I'm mentioning Hillel, Elder Hillel, as he was known at the time, actually legitimized Jewish birth through the mother's lineage. That was the first time in history that had happened. Up until that point, Jewish males were the ones carrying the line of birthright and those sorts of things. As Mr. Aronow has noted, there were a lot of wars and conquerings and things like that, and so there were a lot of children who didn't really have fathers around, but had Jewish mothers who were raising the children in the faith. Sam explains that honestly, some of it was a hatred for Herod the Great, whose father was not strictly born of Jewish blood. So they wanted to try to politically ease one burden on the poor women of Egypt and other areas, Alexandria, Egypt. And they also wanted to stick it to Herod. So that's what Hillel did. And so I mentioned that to get back to the point of Mary's genealogy. If you notice in the book of Matthew, there are far more women mentioned. I think there's a reason for that. I think that it's preparing us for a controversial idea that was brand new at the time. I mean, it wasn't necessarily controversial as far as I know. I mean, we don't have any writings that detail, which elders were for it and which elders were against it, matrilineal lineage. But we do know that it was a new idea. It was only a few decades old when Jesus was born. That lineage passes through the mother. So in a lot of ways, I think that Matthew was sort of preparing his audience to not only take on this new way of seeing Jewish legitimacy, but also elucidating that many women throughout Jewish history have been important and have given to the Jewish faith. So, because this is a genealogy that not many Jewish people would have been thrilled about, partially because of the women in it at the time. Now, I can't say that is fact. That's a conjecture. But that's my theory on why this seems to be more in line with the idea that it is Mary's genealogy. The reason that Nehemiah Gordon said that this might be the case specifically is that the end of the lineage, the particular word in Aramaic that is used can mean husband, or it says husband in the King James Version, but it could mean father. A lot of people like to do that in the Gospels. They like to say, well, it says brothers, but it means cousins, that sort of thing. But this one I actually agree with because it makes sense of the genealogies, and the difference in genealogies. Now, we don't have different things in the Gospels that say that John was a brother and that John was a cousin. You know what I mean? We don't have those sorts of issues the same way that we do with father and husband. And Aramaic is a language that I'm not well versed in. I don't know Hebrew and Greek, or Aramaic, so I am very much relying on the expertise and honesty of scholars who are much better at this sort of thing than I am. So, controversy number 1. Matthew's genealogy is about Mary, and Luke's genealogy is about Joseph. When was Jesus born? Jesus, according to Michael Heiser, was born September 11th, 3 BC. He says that it has to do with the astronomical celestial events happening at that time. And he's not necessarily wrong. The interesting thing to me about that is that September 10th, 3 BC equates to Tertiary 1, 3759, the year 3759. That's the first of the year. That's the Feast of Trumpets. Jesus was born right on the cusp of the end of 4 BC and the beginning of 3 BC. I think that's fascinating to have a Savior born, a new way of being, a new way of doing, a new way of thinking at the very first of the year. I think that's symbolic. I think that in line with all of the other astronomical events, it lends credence to the idea that we're being prepared for something new. I know that Jesus' birthday is traditionally celebrated December 25th or 24th, and there are good reasons for that. And I'm not saying we should ever switch the Christmas season up. That's not the point of what I'm trying to say. I think that we have adapted a lot of different calendars for a lot of different reasons. And, there might have been something really significant in Yeshua's life around December that makes it, more likely that we celebrate it. But I guess I haven't really gotten that far on that road. I'm just, for the purposes of the book, his birthday is going to be September 10th or 11th, 3 BC. And that means that he's a little bit older by the time he's crucified and rises from the grave. And a lot of people may or may not like that, but that's what I'm going with. I like the idea that I'm putting realistic astronomy in there, and not astrology. But you know what? The Jewish people and everybody at that time didn't have iPhones or farmers' almanacs, and everybody was watching the sky and these celestial events. They didn't have light pollution. They were able to see things so much clearer than we are in the sky, and they were much more in tune with the seasons and what was happening and why. I think that it's a fascinating factoid of history. I've also played with the idea that maybe he was born in 5 BC, the cusp of 4 and 5, or 3. So he's either born the tertiary first, 3759 or 3760. 58. 3758, because the Jewish calendar continues to move forward. Our calendar continues, when BC we go backwards. I think that that's going to actually help a lot. I actually do think that John was born perhaps 3 months or 6 months before, 3 months, 6 months. 6 months before Jesus was born. Another controversial idea, to some, not to others, is that Mary was there at the birth. It's a very old tradition that she was actually there when John was born. In the book, I'm going to say that she is called back to Jerusalem and leaves right after the birth. She doesn't stay for John's circumcision. yeah, and I'm going to discuss some controversial stuff about John too, but I know this video is a bit long, so I'm going to move on to the next controversial topic. That's where I've settled on Jesus's real birthday. So this one is going to upset more traditional Orthodox and perhaps some Protestants too. But like I kind of alluded to earlier, in the Gospels, we never have the problem of mistaking John the Baptist as a brother or cousin of Jesus. We always see in the book that he is, in fact, a cousin. I don't know if that's because the Greek was more specific, or for whatever reason, the Gospel in the King James Version says that John the Baptist was a cousin. And in the book of Mark, which James Tabor says is the very first book written, and I have no reason to disagree with him on that. I don't know if he's the first one that figured that out or discusses that, but I'm pretty sure he's not. Either way, I think it's generally scholarly opinion now that Mark was first. And there are good reasons for that. It's the shortest book. It doesn't have a lot of extraneous details. There are plenty of reasons for that. So in Mark chapter 6, verse 3, a group of people ask Jesus, or they ask each other, I suppose, is this not the Mason's son of Mary, the brother of James, of Joseph, of Judah, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they were offended at him. Okay. I have run into controversy on this. I think a lot of the idea about Mary being a virgin is correct. I'm going to say that Mary was in fact a virgin when she gave birth to Yeshua. I believe that that's the case. I believe that that's the truth. So I believe that when Yeshua was born, no man had ever known her or touched her. So that's what I'm going to be purporting. But I'm also going to say that Joseph was not an old man who had a family already and then married Mary out of pity or whatever it was. I'm going to say that he was a younger man, a few years older than her, obviously, because he had to have a life and income for them. But yeah, I'm going to say that he wasn't terribly old and had a family of his own before. I believe that after Yeshua was born, the two actually did make a family. And I think this is more or less in order of birth. I don't remember if I've switched Judah and Simon, or if I've kept the same order, but I do know that in my book, James and Joseph Jr., Joseph Jr., Joseph, are the next brothers that are born. I also have his sisters in there because we have text in the different Gospels that what's her name? I've forgotten her name. Salome? No. Salome? That sounds right. He had a sister Salome and a sister Mary. I think that helps answer some of the questions at the differences in Gospels when we talk about the women that were at the cross and the women who were, related to Jesus in different ways, the level of importance. Mary, Jesus' sister, is not the same person as Mary Magdalene or the same person as Mary of Bethany. That's what I've gathered from my particular research of all of this. But I think that he had, James, Joseph, Judah, Simon, about 7 siblings, which actually would have been kind of normal in those days. So he had half siblings. And I know that that's a little bit controversial. In the book, I have the order, I think, as Jesus, and then they marry officially and do, well, no, I think they get married while she's still pregnant, because otherwise the census doesn't make any sense. So they're married, she gives birth, and almost immediately they have to run to Egypt. And then James is born, then Salome, or I'm getting her name wrong probably. But the sister starts with an S, so it's James, S name, Joseph. I think I have Simon next, Mary, and then Judah. And Judas is born at the very end because I think he wrote the book of Jude. The book of Jude wasn't written until much later. And in Jude, he says he is the brother of James. James is very important, I think, because he is the legitimate brother of Jesus on the mother's side, obviously. So that's me piecing all of these pieces together. There are thousands of arguments why I'm wrong. I know, but I think this is actually just an interesting way of reading the text and sort of putting things together. But yeah, I have Judas being born somewhere quite late. I think Jesus is going to be close to 20 by the time that little Jude is born. And that makes it the case that his brothers and him and his sister all have a chance to sort of grow, and maybe some of them marry, some of them don't, while Jesus is in his teens and 20s. So that's the beginning of this story that I'm writing. And those are the 3 main controversial topics that I'll be covering. So I'd love some feedback on it. And I'm happy to discuss or debate any kind of information you might have, something that adds to my ideas, something that detracts from my ideas. Fine, I'm willing to read it all. So that was the genealogies of Jesus, when Yeshua was born, and the order of the birth of his siblings. Controversial, yes, but it makes sense to me. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks.